So we've got another great presentation coming up now. Chris Thompson from Fresh Minds is going to tell us more about the lessons we can learn from startups in a minute. If we get his presentation on the screen, please. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for agreeing to spend the next 20 minutes with me. This is a pretty tough slot because I'm keeping you from your lunch, so I'll try and be brief. I want to try and get to know as many of you as I can over the course of the day, but let me give a little introduction to myself first. So I'm Chris Thompson. I'm the innovation lead at a company called Fresh Minds. Fresh Minds is an insight and innovation consultancy based out of London. But that's who I am. Why am I here? Well, what I want to do today is just spend the next 20 minutes sharing some thoughts that I've had with you. And those thoughts are really along 3 lines. I've been thinking to myself recently, we hear so many news stories about disruptive startups, huge valuations, traditional industries being decimated and disrupted left, right, and center. But really, who are these disruptive startups that are causing such problems for everybody? And the second thing is, what sets them apart? What really makes them so disruptive? And what does this new disrupted landscape mean for the role of research and insight and innovation in the new brave world? So before we get to that, I want to start with a very short story. So I used to work in Amsterdam a few years ago. And normally when I come to Amsterdam, what I do is I take a taxi from my home in London, I go to Gatwick Airport, I jump on a flight, get to Schiphol, I jump in another taxi, I tend to go for dinner. There's a lovely little sushi restaurant nearby called Yata Sushi. You should check it out if you can. And then I head over to the Hilton, get some sleep, and then I get meetings the next day, taxi, flight home. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to run a little experiment on myself to try and immerse myself in this presentation. So what I did was I tried to see if I could take all of that journey and fulfill it using disruptive startup service offerings. So here's what I did. I tried to take all my taxi journeys using Uber. I use it a lot in London. I'm happy to see it's alive and kicking in Amsterdam, despite some protests. And then I sourced my flight on Skyscanner. That's nothing new. And then I used Airbnb to find a lovely little apartment in the center of Amsterdam instead of going to the Hilton. And then for dinner, I thought, this is a pretty big risk because I love this sushi restaurant down the road. But I took a big risk and I used this company called Share Your Meal. Now, Share Your Meal is an application which connects chefs, wannabe superstar chefs at home, cooking big portions of food, and then you can turn up to their door, and then they share their meal with you. So I paid 15 euros. I got a delicious meal of spaghetti bolognese. Took it. It was great. It wasn't sushi, but it was good. And then I took a taxi here this morning using Uber. So I pretty much fulfilled all the things I needed to do using these collaborative models. And what occurred to me is these things are pretty useful. Like I spent a little bit more time than I normally do organizing my trip, but I saved a hell of a lot of money. Normally a trip like that costs me about 550 euros. This time round it's going to cost about 400 euros. Now that's about a 30% saving. So if there are any finance directors in the room, and I don't know whether there will be, but if you're looking to cut travel and expenses budgets, think about using a collaborative model. So what does that really say? It says we should be taking these companies pretty seriously because they're having a big impact. But more than that, we should be learning from them. So I come back to my original question, who are these upstarts? What are they doing? And the first thing to say is they're not startups as we would normally know them. Let's talk a little bit about Airbnb and Hyatt. Now everybody knows the Hyatt Hotel Group, okay? A big global chain of hotels. The Hyatt Group was formed in 1957. They have 80,000 people working for them globally. And Airbnb, which launched in 2008, is now valued at more than the entire Hyatt group globally. Now, that's not a startup. That's a significant enterprise. Now we think about Uber. What the slide says here is Uber is greater than Fiat plus Hertz plus Mitsubishi Motors. Now, just to give you a size of the scale of that, combined, Fiat, Hertz, and Mitsubishi, they have 230 years of operating history, okay? They have a combined workforce of more than 250,000 people. And yet Uber, a little startup that was launched out of California in 2010, is worth more than that entire section of companies. Now, this is absolutely astonishing. I couldn't believe it when I read these stats, Uber being valued at more than 41 billion. We should be taking these companies very seriously indeed. But in order to learn from them, we really need to understand what sets them apart fundamentally as business models before we can really learn from them. So how are they different? What I want to think about is a traditional offline retail model, okay? This is the model that we have on the left, the offline model, Company X, all right? Company X, at a group level, at the company level, it's consolidated. But it's a retailer and it has to have shops locally to sell to local people. So in its operations and assets layer, it has individual stores in every city, serving local customers. Now, let's think about the online model that we all know. Take Amazon, for example. When Amazon started selling CDs and books, they had an online centralized operations and assets layer. They were able to serve a huge customer base using an online web store and distribution centers and logistics centers. And that allowed them to access a huge customer base globally. But what's the difference between that and a truly disruptive model, what we might call a collaborative disruptive model? Well, on the right-hand side, we have one of these, and the key difference is this. If you look at the operations and the assets layer, those operations and assets are delivered by us, by you and me, by customers, and by other companies. So what that really means is the company that's running a collaborative model using online doesn't have to invest in an operational and assets layer as we would know it. And that gives them a huge advantage. So we kind of know how they're structured differently, but why does that make them so disruptive? And the answer is this. So let's think again about a traditional offline model, which is pictured on the left. That large square represents 100% of all of their assets, okay? And 80% of all of those assets are in the light blue. These are tangible assets. They're shops, they're supply chain and logistics centers, they're machinery. They are true tangible assets. And then the other portion of that 80% is made up by people and skills, people with know-how and training to deliver the goods and services that they offer. The remaining 20% is made up of intellectual property and routes to market, and that's basically what makes up the asset base of a traditional company. Now let's look at an online collaborative disruptive company. All of that 80% is delivered by customers and the public. So let's think about Uber compared to a normal taxi company. These people, they own their own cars. They haven't had training. There is no HR system in place. There's no company structure to keep these people on salary. The financial systems of the company don't have to deal with that level of complexity. So 80% of the barrier to entry for them to get into business has been removed by adopting a collaborative online model. They only have that 20% left, and that's where they deploy a digital platform using their intellectual property and also providing a route to market for the people that use it and supply the operational side. I guess the thing to think about is if you do have an idea, and we all have ideas, if you do have an idea of launching a disruptive offering, yes, the product needs to be absolutely fantastic and customers need to want to love it. But if you want to find out if it's going to be truly disruptive, first look at the operating model. So I'm just going to give you a quick example of how these disruptive organizations approach innovation. Again, we'll stick with the example of Uber. Late last year, Uber launched a new service in Washington, D.C. It was called Uber Essentials. Now, basically what happens with Uber Essentials is if you need something like a toothbrush, and you need it pretty urgently, you can get online, go on Uber, and then an Uber driver will go and buy you one and deliver it back to you within 10 minutes. Pretty ambitious stuff. Uber said, they publicly said, this is a limited time only experiment, and the more that customers love it, the longer it will stay around. So what they were doing is they were innovating in an agile way. They were adopting agile innovation. Unfortunately, the offering can't have been that good because they cancelled the service this year. But it wasn't a failure because the objective of the project was not to make money. The objective of the project was to learn about their customer base and learn about the demand level for these kind of services. So in that respect, it was a huge success. So thinking about agile innovation, why does it make business sense? If Uber are doing it and other companies are doing it, what business sense does it make to do that? So let's look on the left. We've got a traditional new product development kind of cycle where all the efforts of the company are plowed into new product development, and all of that is about refining a product. Let's stick with a product. Refining a product, honing its design, making sure that people want the feature sets, the look and feel is perfected, all to get that product to a place where it can launch in the market. But the difficulty with that is, all the while you're refining that product, your business risk is going up. Because the more refined your product, the less likely it is that a larger chunk of customers will want to buy it. And that sounds crazy because it's counterintuitive. But think about this. If you start with a really broad idea, that idea encapsulates all of the possibilities of the product. Therefore, it has a much wider appeal base, or it has the potential to have a wide appeal base. The more you refine that product and decide what it is and what it isn't, the more streamlined it gets and the more it's tailored to a customer set. So actually, you're limiting the audience of your product and increasing your business risk because ultimately you might be building a perfect product that nobody wants. So on the right-hand side, here's the agile approach to innovation. The end goal is not to drive product maturity, but it's to drive knowledge maturity. And some of you guys out there probably have read Lean Startup. You're well versed in Lean Startup theory. Knowledge maturity is the goal of an agile innovation approach to new product development. And the way it works is you run short experiments. And sometimes the product will be great, and sometimes the product will be poor. But the end goal is knowledge maturity. And as knowledge maturity increases, business risk comes down because you know much more about the customers that you're trying to serve, and you're pretty sure that what you're producing is going to be wanted by somebody. So why don't we see this approach to agile innovation in big companies? Well, we do. We do see it in pockets, but really in the big corporates that a lot of us work with, why is this such a big deal and why is it so difficult to do? And the answer is stuff we all know about, like organizational inertia, not enough budget, resource capacity, and things like that. We all know about that. But really, there's an elephant in the room, and I think it's this. I think it's that during the new product development process, a business case has to get put together, and as online quant appeal testing has become widely available, it's the online appeal testing number that gets put into the business case. And that basically that number is how many customers out there are willing to say that they would think about buying this product. And then that number gets put in as the top line volume of sales, and then the adoption curve is plotted, and the revenue model says, okay, in 3 years' time, if we sell all of this, we might make some money, we'll at least make a return, and then we'll make some profit. But the elephant in the room is, how many of those customers that said they would think about buying it would actually be willing to hand over cold, hard cash that they've been out and earned to buy your product? And the truth is, with appeal testing, it's very difficult to tell. So how can corporates be a little bit more agile? What options they have available to go and do some agile innovation and some in-market testing? And I'm just going to give 3 quick examples. In the UK, a new startup was launched called Appear Here. Now, Appear Here is an app which lets you go online and it shows you the location of pop-up restaurants and shops and market stalls. So for the price of subscribing to the app and booking a slot in a pop-up restaurant or shop, you can really quickly find out whether somebody's willing to hand over cold hard cash. The other thing you can do if it's a digital platform product to get it up to a certain state of maturity is run a hackathon. But if it's a product that you're trying to develop, with the maturity of 3D printing and rapid prototyping, a new breed of new product development enablers has sprung up. Now in the UK, there's a company called Fab Lab, and they have facilities around the UK where you can go in with customers and with your clients and do rapid prototyping, and within 24 hours you have a product to take to market. And Fab Lab has launched in the UK, it's in Manchester and London, and they're setting up a facility in New York as well. So, coming back to research, insight, and innovation. What does all this mean for research, insight, and innovation in the agile innovation world? And I just want to leave you with 3 simple points. I think the first is we need to start involving customers early and earlier in the process of new product development. And the reason is you get to co-create with them, but also as you co-create with them, you can test with them. And that brings me on to the second point, which is we live in the real world. We need to test in the real world with real products to get away from this elephant in the room about the business case. And the third point is we really need to stop seeing insight as a linear process, because as we move to agile innovation with lots of small experiments to get up the knowledge maturity curve, actually insight is not just something that you do at the very beginning of the new product development cycle as a big project. It's something that needs to be iterated and built into the new product development process. And my prediction is that insight projects will get smaller in absolute scale, but their number and frequency will increase as more and more companies adopt an agile innovation model. And that fills me with excitement, and it should fill you with excitement too, because that creates huge opportunity for those involved in insight and research. So that's what I wanted to leave you with. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, last opportunity this morning for questions. Yes, at the front, please. Please state your name, company, and the house you're from.
Sorry, Maya from Saros and House Theta. Going back to the very beginning of your presentation, a thought that stayed with me. I love the idea that you planned your trip using only these collaborative sharing services. You mentioned that inevitably there was a bit of a cost in terms of time and planning, like it's more hassle to check into an Airbnb because you've got to find your host and get hold of them and things like that, or you might wait slightly longer for an Uber, or it can't use the cab lanes in London. I'm just wondering if there's room for another shared disruptive service that coordinates all of that for business travelers. And I just wanted to capture that thought. It's not maybe relevant for your immediate presentation, but somebody ought to build that.
You should patent it quickly, and then
Yes.
we'll develop it together.
Brilliant.
No, I think it's a great idea. One thing I did find, which was really interesting during this experiment on myself, is that although it took me longer to physically plan my trip, I was actually more engaged in it. I actually enjoyed planning it because it was different. It had a more personal feel. It was away from the relatively bland experience that planning a corporate trip can be. So I think there are advantages in this more collaborative sharing model other than being cheaper.
Brilliant, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
More questions? Well then, thank you very much, Chris.